Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the gruesome yet surprisingly calculated mechanics of medieval and early modern execution methods. We're going to pull back the curtain on the bizarre legal and spiritual philosophies that actually shaped these extreme practices. You know, when we look back at history, it's so easy to just dismiss these punishments as random, senseless brutality. But as we'll see from the primary sources, they were actually highly structured, meticulously designed instruments of state power and justice. So, before we really get into the thick of it, I want you to think about this question. If ending a criminal's life was the ultimate goal, why on earth did medieval courts work so incredibly hard to delay the actual moment of death? It's a fascinating paradox, right? Well, the answer lies in this really strange intersection of absolute authority and a deeply held belief in pain as purification. All right, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with Section 1, the philosophy of pain. Then 2, treason and total destruction. 3, elements of annihilation. 4, custom and bizarre punishments. And we'll wrap up with 5, the ghastly afterlife. Section 1, the philosophy of pain. Let's go ahead and establish the philosophical baseline of medieval justice. Now, in our modern minds, a humane execution is quick and painless. But back then, extreme cruelty was actually a calculated, legally codified feature. There's this idea that the inhumane nature of the execution was the punishment, and death was simply the absolution. And honestly, that just brilliantly illustrates the era's mindset. It shows us how extreme suffering was engineered not merely to terrify the public into obedience, but as a literal path to spiritual purification. See, in medieval societies, as long as a person repented, the belief was that they would go to purgatory and eventually make it to heaven. So the prolonged agony of punishments, like being broken on a wheel or drawn and quartered, was specifically designed to make them suffer before they died. It acted as this fiery absolution of their earthly sins. Moving on to Section 2, treason and total destruction. Let's look at the ultimate penalty for threatening the crown. High treason. Because the monarch represented the state itself, an attack on them was viewed as an attack on the very fabric of society. So the punishment was meticulously designed to mirror that extreme severity. Take the hanged, drawn, and quartered sentence. It wasn't just random chaos, it was a highly sequential, multi-staged, theatrical destruction. At minute 1, the condemned was drawn, meaning they were fastened to a wooden hurdle and dragged by a horse. Fast forward to around minute 15, they were hanged, but, and here's the crucial part, deliberately cut down while still alive. What followed was a precise anatomical dismantling. By minute 20, emasculation to show their bloodline was corrupt, followed by disembowelment, then beheading at minute 25, and finally being quartered or chopped into pieces. It wasn't just a death, you guys, it was the total erasure of a person. Now, you might be wondering, did everyone get this exact same treatment? Actually, no. It's important to impartially note the legal distinctions of the time. This specific, gruesome physical dismantling was only applied to men. Because of the era's incredibly strict views on anatomy and public decency, women convicted of the exact same crime of high treason were spared the quartering block. Instead, the law dictated a fiery alternative, and they were burned at the stake. But for the men who were quartered, the butchery didn't even end at death. Authorities needed to display these body parts across the country as this stark, rotting warning to anyone else thinking of treason. To pull this off, they treated the quartered remains with this incredibly ghastly recipe. The body parts were parboiled, packed tightly with salt to prevent putrefaction, and then heavily coated in cumin seed. And why cumin, of all things? Well, the strong spice deterred scavenging birds from pecking at the flesh, while it was displayed upon pikes at high-traffic places like London Bridge. Section 3, Elements of Annihilation. Let's explore how this underlying philosophy built into escalating tiers of destruction. Certain crimes warranted punishments that tapped into the primal elements, fire, water, brute physical force, designed not just to kill, but to completely deny the victim a physical resurrection at the end of days. Boiling alive is a perfect example. It was a slow, agonizing dissolution of the body. Unlike the quick drop of a gallows, this punishment completely relied on the slow physics of heat. The victim was lowered into a massive cauldron of water, oil, or tar. Sometimes they were put in before the fire was even lit, intentionally prolonging the shock and agony. It was officially weaponized into law by leaders like England's King Henry VIII, specifically for poisoners, and famously suffered in 16th century Japan by the legendary bandit Ishikawa Goemon. Then there's the breaking wheel. A heavy wagon wheel was literally smashed into the victim's limbs, shattering their bones before their mangled body was woven through the spokes and hoisted up into the air. But here's the fascinating catch. While these tools were designed for total physical ruin, sometimes leaving victims alive up there for days, executioners could occasionally be instructed to grant what was called a coup de grace, or retendum. This was a specific mercy blow to the chest, or sometimes a hidden strangulation cord used to end the torment early. It just goes to show that even within this absolute brutality, there were rigid, calibrated legal parameters at play. Section 4. Custom and bizarre punishments. We're going to transition now into the bizarre carrying over of ancient laws. Let's look at how courts handled the ultimate societal taboo of parricide, murdering a parent or a close relative. The Roman punishment known as pona calle, or the penalty of the sack, featured a wild, highly specific recipe that was actually revived later by emperors like Constantine and Justinian. First, the condemned was beaten with blood-colored rods. Then they were sewn into a heavy ox leather sack and literally packaged with a chaotic assortment of live animals: a dog, a rooster, a monkey, and a venomous viper. Finally, the whole sack was thrown into the sea or a running river. It was this elaborate, terrifyingly engineered demise meant to totally and utterly remove the offender from the natural world. Section 5. The ghastly afterlife. Let's shift our focus from the moment of death to the bizarre aftermath. Because of the highly public nature of these executions, a strange folklore and dark economy blossomed around the corpses of the condemned. But first, let's clear up a major historical misconception: the gallows and the gibbet. They were actually two entirely different things. The gallows was the active execution tool, the wooden structure used to actually hang the criminal and end their life. The gibbet, on the other hand, was an iron cage specifically designed to suspend the already dead body. It was meant to act as a macabre earthly purgatory, keeping the rotting corpse suspended in this liminal boundary between earth and God, sometimes for months or even years, just serving as a horrific roadside warning. 1 shilling. Think about that amount for a second. That was the literal retail price per inch of a hangman's rope sold directly to the viewing public after an 1802 execution in London. The executioner treating the deadly rope as a commercial perk, casually cutting it up and selling it on the spot? That was actually a surprisingly common practice across Europe. So why were people so eager to buy a piece of the rope? Well, the apparatus of death became highly commodified in a practice that modern historians refer to as execution magic. People genuinely believed that the sheer trauma and power of the execution transferred directly into the surrounding materials. They would harvest the hangman's ropes to cure illnesses like ague or epilepsy. They collected blood-soaked scaffold sawdust for health charms. They'd chip wood right off the gibbet to wear as protective amulets around their necks. They'd even hammer gallows nails into their stables, fully believing it made their horses livelier. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to chew on. We've seen how meticulously engineered pain was codified into law, from boiling cauldrons to the breaking wheel to the bizarre animal sacks of the Poeticuli. It really forces us to confront a dark reality. When absolute authority intersects with human suffering and you remove the bounds of modern moral restraint, how easily does justice transform into a pure spectacle of cruelty? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for exploring this fascinating, albeit very dark, chapter of history with me today.